I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the glittery cursive letters on that cup. Boss Babe Fuel. It was perched like a crown on the desk I'd sat at for 17 years. My chair was gone. The framed dispatch maps I'd curated route by route were stripped off the wall. Even the goddamn ergonomic keyboard I'd special ordered after my wrist surgery was missing, replaced with some pastel, clicky mess that looked like it belonged in a dorm room, not a logistics command center. I turned slowly, trying to process the quiet violence of the takeover. My office, gone. My nameplate, dumped. And then she walked in like she owned the air. "Hey," she chirped, flashing a set of acrylics that looked like they'd been dipped in glitter and bad decisions. "You must be Marcy?" She said my name like it was a museum exhibit. I nodded, still half expecting this to be a joke. "I'm Selena. I'm running Fleet now. Just finished my MBA and Dad said it was time to get real-world experience. Cool, right?" She pointed to a framed org chart pinned up on my old whiteboard. Her name was at the top. Mine wasn't on it at all. Before we go further, if you've made it this far into the story, do me a quick favor. Tap the like button and subscribe. It helps more than you think and really keeps the team going behind the scenes. All right, back to hell. I tried to speak, but she cut me off like she was swatting a mosquito. "We're gonna freshen up this whole thing. Streamline, modernize, no offense, but like, you've been here a while, yeah?" She gestured vaguely, like I was a burnt piece of toast she didn't order. "No offense taken," I said calmly, stepping toward the console that was still humming, still logged in, still running on the security protocol only I had full knowledge of. I watched her eyes flick to it. She didn't recognize what she was looking at. To her, it might as well have been a karaoke machine. "You'll want to reinitialize the Fleet Demon next Monday," I said, my voice even. "Just slide the token in before 7 a.m. or the dispatch kernel won't push live routes." Selena laughed like I'd told a joke. No offense again, but we're moving away from whatever medieval nonsense this is. No more tokens, it's 2025, we'll do a cloud upgrade or whatever." I watched her scoot behind my desk and try to open a scheduling tab. Her nails clicked uselessly on the screen as access denied warnings blinked back at her. I didn't say a word, just turned and walked toward the door. On the way out, I reached down and palmed the token, still warm from the machine, still etched with the ID tag that authenticated me and only me. It slid into my coat pocket like it had always belonged there. No one noticed. Certainly not Selena. She was too busy taking a selfie in my old chair with a hashtag I'd come to hate more than anything. "My girl boss." What she didn't know, what no one in that building seemed to know, was that the system didn't run on personality or hashtags or whatever caffeine-fueled confidence Daddy's money had bought her at Wharton. It ran on trust. And that trust, it was coded, cryptographically enforced, and physically tethered to the token that now rested in my coat pocket. I didn't slam the door on the way out. I didn't make a scene. I just walked. Because the real scene was coming, and it would happen next Monday, right around 6 Mile AM, when 3,000 trucks across the country booted up with blank screens and a message no one in that building could override. No authorized dispatcher. The paper she shoved in my face still smelled like the fresh toner they used upstairs in executive admin. Crisp, overconfident, and bleeding authority from people who'd never done a shift past 5:01 p.m. Selena grinned like she'd just won a stuffed bear at the county fair. Her acrylics tapped the corner of the org chart like it was the final signature on a peace treaty. Except it wasn't peace. It was a coup. "We've been restructuring for weeks," she chirped, flipping her highlighted hair over one shoulder like a threat. "Your title's obsolete. Your workflows are clutter. We're moving to a decentralized dynamic route ecosystem." She said it like she'd read it off a Reddit thread titled, "How to Sound Smart in Logistics Meetings." I glanced at the printout. They'd renamed my role into 3 overlapping middle manager titles, none of which actually mapped to what I did. Typical. No one wants to admit the system works when someone older and quieter built it. Easier to dismantle it with buzzwords and pretend it was broken. "You can't just—" I started, but she held up a perfectly manicured finger. "HR will walk you out. You'll get a separation package and all that, but really, it's time. You've been here how long? Since before GPS tracking was even standard?" She laughed like it was adorable. "This is the future, Marcy. Data forward, Gen Z optimized logistics. We don't need brass tokens and cryptic legacy rituals. This isn't Hogwarts. I could have said a lot in that moment. Could have told her that I wrote the kernel architecture on a laptop balanced on my knees in a hospital waiting room while my son was in surgery. That I didn't miss a single Monday initialization for a decade, not through power outages, not through a divorce, not even the day my dad died. I could have told her the reason none of our competitors ever cracked our routing speed was because I designed a layered trust stack no one in her frat boy SaaS echo chamber had the patience to reverse engineer. Instead, I said, just remember to reinitialize the fleet daemon by 7 a.m. next Monday. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might dislocate something. Don't mansplain. Seriously, we're upgrading the whole back end. That relic you designed is already being containerized. That word, containerized. She said it like she understood what it meant. She didn't. If she had, she'd know the core routing engine couldn't be containerized. It was deliberately hardwired to resist remote abstraction. The auth layer didn't allow full virtualization without a root token handshake. No token, no dispatch. I glanced at the console behind her, still logged in, my credentials still dancing in the upper right. Every Monday, the token synced a heartbeat pulse, confirming that I and only I was present. That heartbeat authorized all route pushes. It was trust, made literal, not stored on the cloud, not delegated through permissions, physical, tactile, personal, and she thought she could rip it all out by uploading a Canva org chart and changing the coffee order. I didn't argue, didn't sigh, just nodded, turned slowly, and walked out. On my way past the console, my hand dipped low, subtle, practiced. No one noticed the faint metallic click as I extracted the token. The heartbeat stopped. But no alarm sounded, because the system doesn't panic. It waits. It's patient, like me. Downstairs, the HR girl with the apologetic eyes tried to read from a script, but I waved her off. You're not the one doing this, I said. She offered me a cheap tote bag with the company logo. I took it. Why not? In the parking lot, I sat in my car with the engine off, watched the loading dock, the forklifts, the dispatch screens flickering behind tinted windows. They looked like they were working, like the world was still spinning. But next Monday was going to feel like the earth stood still, and the only person who knew why would be halfway across the state, sipping tea, waiting to see how long it would take them to realize they'd broken something they didn't even understand. I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, token in hand, watching the sunrise slice through the blinds like a scalpel. I used to love Monday mornings. That 1 hour before the rest of the world stirred, when it was just me, the quiet hum of the routing engine, and the knowledge that 3,000 trucks were about to move like synchronized gears in a machine I built with my bare hands. Now, that hour felt like a funeral procession. Not mine, hers. The token clicked into its cradle with a familiar mechanical thunk, locking in place like a warhead key. I'd had the protective case made years ago when a finance director tried to simplify the process by digitizing my access. He thought he could just copy the token's code. What he didn't realize, and what Selena was about to learn the hard way, was that the token wasn't just a security dongle. It was a gatekeeper. Hardened, single instance, tamper-logged. Every byte it pushed into the system was wrapped in encryption that made Fort Knox look like a lemonade stand. I booted up the old air-gapped terminal in my back room. Took a while. She was ancient, built like a tank, and ran on a hybrid OS I'd compiled myself before the company even had an IT department. Once she was alive and blinking, I opened the dormant script folder. Everything was still there, labeled in my shorthand. The file I needed was called Siren Triprotocol AV3.2. It hadn't been touched in 8 years. Still, I knew exactly what it would do. It wouldn't crash the system, wouldn't corrupt files or trigger alerts, no headlines, no audit flags. It would just quietly, immovably refuse access to dispatch unless one condition was met: physical authentication by my token between 5:45 and 7 a.m. Monday morning. Miss that window, and the routing daemon would enter lockout mode. Routes would queue, GPS signals would idle, and drivers would wait, forever, if necessary, until trust was reestablished. I entered the trigger phrase. If unauthorized credentials overwrite root-level dispatch, initiate fallback authority lockdown. My finger hovered over the return key. I hesitated, not out of doubt, but ritual. A tiny voice in the back of my head whispered, "Are you sure?" Yes, I was sure. Click. The script executed silently, no fireworks, just a single green confirmation line. Fallback protocol active, token authentication required for next cycle. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled. The system was armed, but it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like insurance. They'd stripped my title, my office, my respect, but they hadn't touched the system. They couldn't, because no one had ever cared enough to learn how it actually worked. Selena didn't understand that what she took wasn't a toy. It was a living, breathing, rules-based network. And I designed it to favor stability over authority. The moment they tried to push changes without trust, it would hold its breath and wait. The part that really got me was that she never even asked, never once thought to sit me down and say, "Can you walk me through the back end?" Just assumed she could slap a new coat of branding on my life's work and call it innovation. She'd learn. I spent the rest of the day cleaning out my garage, not for distraction, because I had a feeling I'd need workspace soon. I even pulled out the old whiteboard, wiped off the faded residue of past dispatch experiments, and drew a single box in the center, labeled it Day 0, because that's what Monday would be. The day the heartbeat stopped. The day every truck in our fleet blinked, yawned, and refused to move. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. But I was ready. By Friday afternoon, the cracks weren't just showing, they were spreading like fractures in a frozen windshield. What started as a few missed route sinks in Indiana had now ballooned into full-on logistical constipation across 3 states. Kansas City drivers were calling in, saying their tablets hadn't received Tuesday's updates. Pittsburgh's warehouse lead said his third shift had loaded freight with no outbound manifests. And in Dallas, one of our veterans, I think his name was Hank, drove 42 miles to a supposed drop site that no longer existed in the system. Selena's brilliant solution? Restart the server or something. Someone actually did. For 2 hours, the back-end routing console blinked in a sad loop, trying to reestablish credentials it no longer had access to. Every supervisor's override was rejected instantly, not because of a firewall or malware or any of the boogeymen the IT interns were suddenly screaming about. No, it was simpler than that. The system didn't trust them. And trust, real, coded, hardware-verified trust, was no longer part of their daily vocabulary. I sipped my coffee on the balcony like it was a front-row seat at the opera. The local news ran a quiet segment about unexpected freight slowdowns out of our main depot. Nothing alarming yet. Just shots of warehouse workers standing around, confused, waiting for direction that never came. The anchor smiled and promised it'd be sorted by Monday. I nearly choked on my coffee. Monday was the cliff. That night, sometime around 11:45, my phone buzzed. Not the work phone, my personal one, buried in a drawer under expired coupons and an old Fitbit I never bothered to charge. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Routing engineer. Dana G. We'd spoken maybe twice in the past year. She was sharp, kept to herself mostly, like I did, but had a good eye for redundancies and was one of the few who actually read the back-end notes I left in the system logs. Her message was short. "Hey, did you ever set a physical auth on the fleet kernel? No emojis, no lol, or just wondering." That last part was what told me everything. She wasn't asking casually. She was bracing for impact. I didn't reply, but I opened a blank file on my local drive and logged the timestamp, sender, and exact wording. Not to cover my tracks, just to document the pivot. The moment someone on the inside realized they were driving blind and the only person who knew the map had already walked out the door. Somewhere, in a boardroom lit by LED panels and LinkedIn quotes, Selena was probably still saying things like agility and disruption while flipping through a PowerPoint someone else made. She probably still believed the system just needed a good defrag or patch or maybe a new UI. That's what happens when you grow up with apps. You start thinking all problems can be solved by dragging icons into new folders. But logistics isn't drag and drop. It's trench work. It's timing. It's knowing that if a single truck leaves 10 minutes late, a cold chain collapses and someone's shipment of insulin goes bad. She didn't know that. And worse, she didn't care. That night, I pulled out the token again. Ran a quick diagnostic. All systems nominal. Fallback protocol holding. Next trigger window, Monday, 5:45 a.m. to 7:01 a.m. No authentication, no dispatch. I placed the token back in its case and locked it with a quiet click. Let the system sleep, for now. By 3 a.m., the system had gone silent. Not crashed, not frozen, just still, like it was holding its breath. The routing daemon executed the protocol exactly as designed. No valid token detected during the authentication window, so it locked out dispatch authority across all regions. Failover attempts triggered a log entry that now read in red, bold caps, "No authorized dispatcher." By 3:17, the first regional command center in Ohio attempted a manual push. Denied. Then Missouri. Denied. Then Texas, Michigan, and the Georgia hub. Every one of them rejected with the same system response. Trust authentication failed. Await authorized credentials. At 4:10, my old emergency contact profile lit up like a Christmas tree. I watched it from my private console, sipping black tea like I was sitting front row at a chess tournament. They didn't know it, but every failed attempt sent me a ghost ping, buried deep in the fallback script, designed to notify me if someone tried to tamper with the kernel after DOS. It was the equivalent of the system whispering, "They're trying to guess the password." By 4:37, Selena had shown up on site. Security footage, which I may or may not still have access to, showed her storming into the IT bullpen like she was auditioning for a made-for-streaming drama. Hair tied back in one of those ridiculous scrunchies that looked like it cost more than my first car. A venti iced caramel something in one hand, and a death grip on her phone in the other. "We need to override the system and get routes out now," she snapped at the lead sysadmin, a guy named John who once asked me if the kernel could be ported to a NoSQL framework. I told him no. He did it anyway. It broke. He never asked again. John blinked. "We've tried. Credentials aren't syncing. System doesn't recognize any of our logins." "Well, what about the backup instance?" "That is the backup instance," he said, not looking up. "Primary failed when you ran that container update Friday. It triggered a root trust verification and—" Selena slammed her hand on the desk, cutting him off. "Why doesn't it recognize me? I'm the head of logistics." John's voice was quiet. "Because you didn't reestablish the chain of trust. The token handshake was never completed." Her face blanked like someone had unplugged her brain. What the hell is a chain of trust? And there it was. The moment the system drew the line between authority and access. I'd always said it in meetings like gospel. Authority is what the org chart gives you. Access is what the system trusts you with. Selena had one. She never earned the other. At 5:12 a.m., drivers across the country sat behind the wheels of 3,000 trucks, waiting. GPS lights blinked. Fuel gauges dropped. Dispatch screens showed a single, looping message. Route unavailable. Awaiting authorization. Warehouse docks filled with pallets that had nowhere to go. Cold freight risked spoilage. Deliverables missed insurance windows. Call centers rang off the hook. By 6 the board had been alerted. Legal had started combing through system documentation. And I was still at home, still in my robe, still watching the system I built do exactly what I told it to do 10 years ago. Trust no one unless they hold the key. And right now, the key was in a locked case on my kitchen table, next to a half-eaten banana and a stack of utility bills. Funny how the little things become powerful when no one else thinks to respect them. Selena thought she could shout her way into control. The system didn't hear her. It only heard silence, and responded in kind. The air inside Dispatch HQ felt like it had been vacuum sealed. All that anxiety and caffeine and rising panic compressed into one long, twitching silence. Screens were red. Phones off the hook. Ops leads stood frozen in mid-argument, trying not to look like they were losing control, even though the system had been offline for over 2 hours, and every minute meant another fine, another contract breached, another customer filing a complaint they couldn't answer. When I walked in, my shoes echoed on the linoleum louder than they should have. Visitor badge swinging from a thin plastic lanyard, tote bag on my shoulder, no blazer, no power suit, just me and the little brass token cupped in my palm like a truth they'd all forgotten. No one stopped me. They just parted. Selena was at the center of the chaos, standing in front of the main console with her hands clenched so tight I could see the imprint of her ring on her middle finger. Her voice cracked just as she saw me. "You? What are you even doing here?" I didn't stop walking until I reached the console. My console. I held up the token slowly, like a parent holding up a report card. "You didn't reinitialize," I said. She blinked, face turning pink with anger and something that looked dangerously close to fear. "That's sabotage," she hissed. "No," I replied, sliding the token into the reader with a quiet click. "That's design." For a split second, nothing happened. And then everything did. The screens lit up like a Christmas miracle. Red turned to green, routes unfroze, GPS signals blinked alive. Across the country, dispatch consoles rebooted and quietly handed control back to the network. Truck engines roared back to life, manifests synced, and status bars began to climb like floodwaters. I stepped back and crossed my arms. The room erupted, not in panic, but relief. Cheers, claps, even a shout from the East Coast lead, who punched the air and yelled, "We're back online!" I didn't gloat, didn't smile, just let the noise pass over me like rain. Selena sank back into her chair, not defeated, just exposed. She looked small now, like a kid who'd been told they could drive the family car and then wrapped it around a light pole. Her hands hovered over the keys, unsure, twitching, like she might try to reclaim some part of this moment. But no one looked at her. They were all looking at me. "You built this," someone whispered behind me. I turned slowly to see ops leads gathering around, people who hadn't said a word to me in months, who'd been too busy updating their job titles and polishing their LinkedIn profiles to remember who wrote the infrastructure documents they still pretended to read. I gave a small nod. "Yes," I said simply. One of the newer dispatch engineers stepped forward, nervous. "Why would the system do all this? Just lock up." I looked around the room. Because it was designed to trust people who showed up. Who earned it? It doesn't care what title you have. It only listens to the person holding the key. Someone else asked, "Why didn't you say anything?" I shrugged. Would it have changed anything? Silence. Selena stood, suddenly defiant again. "This isn't how modern systems work. This isn't how leadership works. You can't just hold an entire department hostage because you don't like a new org chart." I tilted my head. "Funny, you didn't think it was hostage-taking when you handed me a tote bag and told me to disappear." She flinched, not visibly, but enough. The founder's executive assistant appeared then, out of breath and ghost pale. She didn't look at Selena, just handed her a folded note. Selena read it, blinked, and sat back down without another word. Whatever was on that note, it didn't come with a backup plan. The room went quiet again, this time for me. I removed the token from the reader and held it in the air for a second, watching the system pulse steady and green across every screen in the room. Then I dropped it back into my pocket. The trucks were moving again, but nothing else would ever go back to how it was. By 10:03 a.m., a car was already en route to Newark to collect the founder off a red-eye from Geneva. The man hadn't been stateside in months, preferred to operate from altitude, as he liked to say in shareholder letters. But altitude meant nothing when 3,000 trucks nearly caused a supply chain stroke because his daughter wanted to prove she could optimize operations with hashtags and bubble tea. Now, he was flying home in business class silence, probably replaying every smug "I've got this" daddy text she'd sent since May. Inside HQ, legal was already combing through old archives. It took them less than 30 minutes to confirm what I knew they'd find. The clause was buried in a legacy contract, signed in ink, time-stamped, and notarized, 11 years ago, back when we were still operating out of 2 warehouses and Selena was likely still failing driver's ed. Maekkoen, sole dispatch token authority shall remain vested in the role of fleet systems architect or designated successor, with no alternate credential override permitted without physical transfer of primary key object. That was the line. Legal read it twice, then once aloud. Someone asked what a primary key object was. I pulled the token out of my coat pocket and laid it on the table like a poker chip. That. It landed with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. No one said a word for a beat. Then the room rustled with quiet activity. Calls made, files reopened, meetings scheduled. A glass-walled conference room was cleared, and Selena was led inside by a compliance officer. Not forcibly, not dramatically, just with the calm, cold efficiency of a cleanup crew arriving after a flood. I didn't go in. I didn't have to. 3 board members joined her, none smiling. One of them, Mitchell, I think, tapped a thick stack of printed system logs against his palm like a gavel. From outside, I saw Selena shaking her head. Denial, then confusion, then silence. She folded in on herself like a bad forecast. Outside that room, things were warmer. Ops leads I hadn't heard from in months made quiet rounds toward my desk. A few shook my hand. One apologized. Another asked genuinely if I'd consider returning. I told them all the same thing. We're not there yet. Because this wasn't about me coming back. It was about whether they'd learned anything. I opened a blank incident report, typed 5 lines. System failed as designed due to failed reinitialization protocol. No breach occurred. No malicious intent. System integrity remained intact. Recommend review of key transfer process. I submitted it to compliance, then walked past the lobby toward the executive wing. The founder's office hadn't changed in a decade. Same dark wood desk, same framed photo of the first truck off the lot. I placed a sealed envelope dead center on the leather blotter. Label: Redundancy Transition Plan. Suggested successor: Miles Chen. Inside, a printed walkthrough of the dispatch protocol, annotated diagrams of the fallback system, and a USB stick containing the new root credential generator, already programmed to accept token authentication from a successor. Miles was quiet, methodical, never tried to show off, the kind of person the system would trust. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the quiet soak in. You could hear the servers breathing again. You could feel the wheels starting to turn, not just in the dispatch system, but in people's heads. They didn't need me to lead anymore. They just needed to remember who designed the engine and why it only listened to hands that earned its trust. They didn't even let her pack up alone. By the end of Wednesday, Selena's access was cut, her badge deactivated, and her laptop wiped so thoroughly it might as well have been a lunch tray. The internal announcement used vague language, departmental realignment, strategic leadership shift. But the message between the lines was clear. She'd been trusted with a legacy system, and she'd treated it like an Etsy side hustle. Her public statement came the next day, typed in someone else's voice, full of passive verbs and jargon that made it sound like the entire logistics department had failed her, due to legacy systems and token protocols no longer compatible with our evolving framework. I stopped reading after that. It was easier to blame architecture than admit she never bothered to read the blueprint. The offer came in that afternoon. Executive control, full authority, revamped title, a generous equity package. I sat across from the founder, same man who'd once called me our quiet failsafe in an earnings call, and told him what I'd been rehearsing in my head for days. No. His brow furrowed, not angry, just confused. You built this. I did, I said. But I built it to outlast me, not orbit me. I don't think he expected that. People like Selena assume the system runs on whoever's loudest. People like her father think it runs on whoever signs the checks. But the truth is, it runs on whoever listens to it. Whoever understands that dispatch isn't just about code or dashboards, it's about accountability. I tapped the brass token sitting on the desk between us. The system doesn't need me anymore. It just needs someone who respects it. Enter Miles Chen. I'd been mentoring him off the books for years. Soft-spoken, methodical, never tried to impress anyone. When he saw a problem, he'd diagram it before he spoke. He'd sat through 6 years of my architecture reviews without ever once asking when he'd get promoted. And that's why he was ready. When I handed him the token, he didn't grab it. He took it gently, like it was something living. His hands didn't shake, but I could tell he knew what it meant. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do what you did, he said. You're not supposed to, I replied, and slid a second item across the table, a small titanium cylinder, still sealed. Master reset key. Never needed it. Hopefully you won't either. He turned it in his hand like a mechanic inspecting a rare tool. Why didn't you stay? I paused. Let the silence sit long enough to matter. Because now it's clean, I said, and I don't patch over messes twice. There wasn't a parade, no send-off party, just a handshake from the founder, a few nods from ops, and a quiet wave from the new compliance liaison who'd been watching everything unfold like a cautionary documentary. I walked out through the same lobby where I'd once been escorted with a severance bag and a plastic smile. This time, no one looked away. No one dared. Outside, the trucks were moving again. The console lights were green, and somewhere deep in the code, the system pulsed, steadily, securely under new hands. It didn't need applause. It had continuity. 2 weeks later, I woke up to a news ping on my phone. Some industry blog had picked up a photo from Selena's freshly rebranded Instagram. New handle, new filter aesthetic, same hollow captions. She was lounging on a teak chaise in Bali, sunglasses on, captioned, "Taking time for myself. Growth isn't linear." Comments were off, probably for the best. You can only delete so many variations of "how's the fleet doing" before your morning mimosa gets warm. Back in the real world, the founder issued a public statement that sounded like it had been co-authored by PR and legal, but the intent was clear. We're launching a security-first logistics framework, prioritizing trust-based authentication and system resilience. They didn't mention me by name. That wasn't the point. The next week, I tuned into the North American Freight Infrastructure Summit. Normally, I would have ignored it, but the speaker lineup had one name that stopped me cold: Miles Chen. He stood at the podium, quiet, composed, wearing the same navy button-up I'd seen him wear for 3 years straight, and flipped to a slide that made my throat catch. On it was a simple architecture diagram. No flashy animations, no cheesy stock photos. Just a black and white schematic labeled Token Protocol Auth Layer, v3.2. Below that, built 2014, and then he said, some people called it outdated, rigid, legacy, but it wasn't any of those things. It was a safeguard, built by someone who cared more about uptime than ego, about trust, not titles. He didn't gesture, didn't name drop, just moved to the next slide and started explaining how the fallback protocol had actually protected them from larger failure cascades during the lockout. Investors in the room nodded like it was gospel. I sat on my couch, black coffee in one hand, laptop on the other, watching the live stream buffer for half a second before catching up. And then I saw it. Bottom right corner of the slide, faint but still there, right where I'd embedded it in the original kernel all those years ago. 3 letters. My initials. No fanfare, no blinking lights, just a quiet signature from a time when I believed systems could outlive their creators if built with enough care. Miles finished his talk with a quote I'd once scribbled in the margins of a notebook during a 4 a.m. outage, back when we had no backup power and the only thing keeping the freight lines alive was sheer will. He said, "Redundancy isn't bloat, it's trust." Etched in brass, and every Monday at 5:45 a.m., it still answers only to the hands that earn it. I didn't clap, didn't smile, just shut the laptop and sat in the stillness. The system was fine. The trucks were rolling, and for the first time in a long while, no one had to ask who built it, because it was still listening, just not to me anymore, and that was exactly the point.